Hello, everybody. Good evening. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Eastern State Penitentiary. My name is Annie Anderson. I'm the Manager of Research and Public Programming here, and I'm really excited to have Danielle here tonight. Thank you so much to her and to all of you for coming out tonight. Has anybody ever been to Eastern State? Okay, many of you, great. I'm just going to give a couple of minutes of an introduction to our building and our programming before we hear from Danielle. So we're sitting in the center surveillance hub of the prison. Eastern State was built on a radial plan model. The thought was that one guard could stand in the center and look down every single cell block and monitor the entire building at the same time. Eastern State is the first true penitentiary designed to inspire penitence or true regret in the hearts of its inhabitants. It was also the first prison to practice solitary confinement on a large scale. So it was philosophically and theologically very influential and also architecturally influential. It inspired the design of over 300 prisons around the world, including this prison in Mexico City, and in Pentonville in London, in Manchester, England. And if you ask the video game Sim City to build a prison for you, this is the prison that it builds for you. It looks very similar to Eastern State. In the early years, prisoners were kept in strict solitary confinement. Eastern State's founders were Quakers who believed that everybody had an inner light, and if people were put alone in a cell, they would be made to reflect and reform and become penitent. They could learn a trade and leave the prison and earn an honest living. We think that there were about 80,000 men and women and children who were incarcerated in this building over the course of its 142-year history. By the early 1900s, the prison shifted to a congregate system and people were allowed to work and worship and play sports together. And there were actual concerts and events held in this very center surveillance hub. These folks are gathered in the mid-1900s for one such event. So the prison was open from 1829 to 1970. It was closed and abandoned for 20 years before it became a museum and historic site. And today we're open, became a historic site in the early 1990s. Today we're open every day for tours. Most of our visitors experience the building via self-guided audio tour, but we have a robust lineup of group and guided tours as well. We also have about a dozen art installations on view. This is Michelle Handelman's piece about the experiences of transgender prisoners incarcerated today. This is Bill Cromar's piece. He's installed a replica cell from Camp X-Ray at Guantanamo Bay, outfitted with everything that a person incarcerated there would have in his cell. This is Jesse Crimes' piece. Jesse was incarcerated in federal prison. He made transfers using hair gel in the New York Times onto prison-issued bed sheets, mailed them home to his mom, and then when he got home, he compiled them all into this collage and then installed it here at Eastern State. More and more we've been talking about contemporary justice issues, including mass incarceration. Every visitor who comes to Eastern State sees our big graph exhibit, which we built in 2014. It shows the unprecedented growth in the prison population over the past 100 years and gets into some of the racial disparities that are evident in our system, and also shows that there's really no international counterpart for the rate at which we incarcerate our citizens. In 2016, we opened a companion exhibit called Prisons Today, and it looks at the policies that have driven mass incarceration, the people impacted by prisons, and the consequences of a criminal conviction. It's meant to humanize the issue and to build empathy for people who are impacted by prison. It's also meant to spark dialogue. We ask our visitors lots of questions throughout. Why are there so many Americans in prison? Have you ever broken the law? Yes or no? Does that make you a criminal? Why or why not? And I'm happy to report that we recently added Danielle to the exhibit as an agent for change in the Changes Possible section. So if you come back, you can see her featured in our exhibit. As we've tackled some of these more contentious issues and complex issues, our attendance has continued to grow. It's grown fourfold over the past 10 years, and we hit 275,000 visitors came to visit in 2018. So what's next for us in 2019 and beyond? We have a new project that we're working on called Hidden Lives Illuminated. We're teaching animation, screenwriting, and storytelling and filmmaking in 2 local prisons, Chester, a state facility for men, and Riverside, county jail for women. Our students are making short animated films that we will then project onto the facade wall of Eastern State in August and September of this year. We hope you'll come back for that. And beyond that, we're building a new visitor center with modern restrooms. The irony is that Eastern State had flush toilets before the White House, but today we make our visitors use restroom trailers. So we're really excited about this brand new, clean, climate-controlled, accessible space that will be coming soon. So tonight's event is part of our Searchlight Series. It's always the first Tuesday of every month. It's always 6 to 7 p.m. It's always free. There's always a free reception to follow. We hope you'll join Danielle and us at the reception down the hallway by El Capone's cell. And you probably got a survey on your way in. If you could fill that out and give it to any event team member or myself, we really do read your feedback. We really do change the event based on your feedback. And we hope you'll join us next month for our Searchlight with Johnny Perez. That will be Tuesday, May 7th. Johnny lives in New York. He is an advocate working to end the practice of solitary confinement. He is the director of U.S. prison programs for the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. He's a dynamic speaker. We hope we'll come back to that. But tonight we're welcoming Danielle Sered. She's going to be talking about reckoning with violence, mass incarceration, and restorative justice, and the road to repair. Danielle is the Executive Director of Common Justice, which develops and advances solutions to violence that meet the needs of those harmed, promote restorative justice, and do not rely on incarceration. Danielle is the author of the recently published book, Until We Reckon, Violence, Mass Incarceration, and a Road to Repair. We will have copies of this for sale at our reception. If you'd like to pick one up, I'm sure she would love to sign it for you. So please join me in welcoming Danielle Sered.
Thank you all so much for being here. Can you hear me all right? It's really powerful to have this conversation in this space, and would love to just take a moment to actually pay attention to the fact that we are somewhere where for decades human beings who were people's sons and daughters and fathers and husbands and loved ones were held separate from the people they loved in small cages, supposedly in the interest of justice. So to just actually feel that that's where this conversation is happening, and that is and remains a huge part of who we are as a nation. And so our central belief at Common Justice is that we will not end mass incarceration unless we tackle the question of violence. That's in part because more than half of the people locked up for crimes of violence, or locked up in this country, are locked up for crimes of violence. So we will not reduce our prison population by more than half by ignoring more than half of the people who are locked up. But it's more than that. It's because there is a different reason why we as a country continually choose to build prisons instead of roads, to build prisons instead of hospitals, prisons instead of schools, prisons instead of trauma treatment centers and healthcare centers and any number of other things that would benefit our society. And that's largely because we have been told a story about some imagined monstrous other. Like somebody who is so different from us that they don't feel empathy quite the way we do. They don't feel pain quite the way we do. They're unmoved by other people's suffering in a way we would be moved. Someone from whom we and our loved ones have to be protected at any cost, financial or moral. That story is as old as our country, and it's not a race-neutral story. It is largely a story that white people have told about people of color since our very inception. And the story animates the worst in our history and the worst in us in service of growing a system that has never and never will deliver on the promise of safety. And so it's our belief that unless we actually come for that central story, that for all that we do trimming the edges of the tree, if we don't come for the roots, the tree will still grow. Actually, well-pruned trees, I think, thrive better in many ways. And so we know we have to steer into the question of violence. But there's a whole another doorway into why we would make that our priority. And I say this looking at one of my heroes in the front row, Dorothy Johnson Spay. We would say we don't care about people who commit violence. Say we say that there are crimes that are serious enough that if you've done them, you've broken the social contract, you no longer belong to us, we no longer have an obligation to you. Say that's where we stand. That is not where I stand, but say it is. Even then, if the only thing that animated us was a commitment to crime survivors, was a commitment to the crime victims in whose name we have grown this beast to a level that is unprecedented, not just in American history, but in all of human history. No other nation has locked up more of its own than we do today, everywhere, ever. If we actually only cared about making right on our commitment to crime victims, then it would be centrally important to us that we develop a response to violence that actually meet their needs, that produce healing, that produce safety, that reduce the likelihood that someone else will undergo the harm that the survivor underwent, that provide some sense of justice and restoration and repair. The criminal justice system as we know it is not that for survivors. I've described it elsewhere saying that the criminal justice system, if someone burns down your house, the criminal justice system can burn down their house in your name but cannot rebuild yours. Survivors deserve a place to live. So at Common Justice, in addition to caring deeply about the end of mass incarceration, we also care about the end of violence. Right? We believe that we are capable of being safer than we are, of causing one another less harm than we do. And just like we know we can't end mass incarceration without tackling the question of violence, we cannot end violence without tackling the question of mass incarceration. That's because mass incarceration is not just a failure, which it unquestionably is, it's that it's dangerous, that it's productive of violence. And I'll say a little more. That's like saying, throwing a Molotov cocktail through the door of a burning building doesn't put out the flames, right? Like mass incarceration itself produces harm. A weapon that we have grown against ourselves and nurtured as a community. One of the things I us that mass incarceration has grown not because of a rise in violence or a rise in crime, but because of a series of choices that we have made. Knowing that means a couple things. It means, one, that we're responsible for those choices. I'll say a little more about what I think that responsibility means. But it also means that we can make different or crime. It is the product of policy. It is the product of shared decisions, which means it's responses to violence should follow 4 core tenets. And I'll talk about each of those tenets and then open it up for conversation. The first of these is that we believe that response. What that means is that in any time